So what must Australia do now to manage its relationship with Indonesia? One of the foremost voices in the area is from the ANU. Dr. Greg Fearley was in Indonesia late yesterday when we spoke with him. That interview in just a moment. But first we're joined by the political editor of The Age, Michael Gordon. Welcome back to the Breaking Politics studio. Michael, what strikes you about the predicament that Tony Abbott now faces in foreign policy so early in the life of his new government?
He's facing a very, very serious test, his biggest test of his prime ministership so far, and against the backdrop of him coming to power saying that this is our most important relationship. That should be the first stop of any prime minister, an attempt to establish a really deep and meaningful relationship with the Indonesian president, and then this comes along. And clearly yesterday his response thus far has been the kind of response that you would have seen in the past, but it clearly is not adequate, and there needs to be more to arrest to address this fracture, and the question is, how much more?
Okay, you'd think the word "sorry, we got it wrong, we shouldn't have done it" would be a reasonably easy thing to say, even if discreetly, a one-on-one Prime Minister to President phone call. Why is it difficult to say sorry in this case?
Well, the problem with a formal apology is that is tantamount to confirmation that this occurred, and that is confirming what we have never confirmed in the past. The policy with intelligence matters is we don't confirm or deny. So a formal, an apology and saying this happened is probably not the right course. I don't think is the right course. But an assurance in this case that this is not happening now and this will not happen again, in terms of intercepting the mobile phone calls of a near neighbour and friend, and indeed the calls of his wife, that isn't happening now and won't happen again, as I think suggested by John McCarthy, the former ambassador to Indonesia this morning. I think that is a prudent course, and I think Tony Abbott should pick up the phone. And
yet Tony Abbott's not taking that course, given what we heard from him yesterday, right?
No, but this is clearly evolving, and as since his statement yesterday, it's been made very, very clear from the Indonesian end, and a Javanese president resorting to Twitter to make very, very strong assertions that what has been said is utterly inadequate. So clearly, to let it fester, I think will make it harder to resolve down the track. And there is, apart from the long-term relationship and medium-term relationship, there are immediate issues that are under threat.
Right. So, Michael, in that sense, Tony Abbott's position is unsustainable as it stands now.
I believe so.
Okay. Don't say sorry. Do say it's not happening now and it won't in the future. Can he do that in private channels? Or simply, as I think John McCarthy was suggesting, pick up the phone, even if nobody knows about it bar the president? Or is this something that is going to have to be done publicly for the Indonesian public to consume as well as us?
Yeah, I think there has to be a mix of both, and maybe an offer of sort of broader dialogue on intelligence gathering and sharing, which has been so valuable to both countries, the cooperation on terrorism in recent years. In the context of that, it could be done. And let's, to be frank, as Alexander Downer pointed out today, people don't, leaders don't and ministers don't say sensitive things on their mobile phones. So the practical case for doing it, to my mind, doesn't exist. And yet, if it is exposed, as it unfortunately was in this case, the consequences are enormous. The other argument for giving such an assurance is that to not give that assurance sits very uncomfortably with everything that Tony Abbott has said thus far about the importance of this relationship. It's our most important relationship. His great regard for the Indonesian president and his desire to have a really important, meaningful relationship.
Tell us a little bit about the circumstances behind these claims of monitoring of the Indonesian president and his inner circle, at least of their phone calls. Who would have had to have approved that? How high up the political chain do you think that went?
Yeah, and that's what we don't know. And yes, there are calls for an inquiry to spell this out. I don't think that's a productive course. I think the the common sense test is that very little is to be gained by those sort of practices, and as I say, a great deal is to be lost if they come into the public domain. So I think that's a matter that a debate that the government can have internally, and reach its conclusion.
But that said, if we are bugging our friends, or at least trying to bug the mobile telephone calls of our friends, not our enemies, a leader this country's held in great regard and has helped this country a great deal, the processes of approving that would have to be are now under question, aren't they? They're now very much under question.
Yeah, but I think that's an internal issue for the government. Bearing in mind this happened 4 years ago.
So it was a Labor minister and a Labor Prime Minister at the time.
And what we know about, it was the information that's come to light is there are very singular episodes and that didn't produce anything. And we don't know how widespread that was, but clearly the lesson from this is that it's a pretty unproductive direction for intelligence services to go.
Technically, it might have been easy to do, which perhaps made it tempting, but we're now learning about the downsides of doing such a thing. All of this comes as Australia tries, of course, to win Indonesian cooperation on border protection issues, on asylum boats. How likely do you think it is that this will damage significantly Indonesia's cooperation on stopping the boats?
Oh, I think that's extremely likely. There are already elements of tension in this whole issue with in terms of turnbacks, and the Indonesians saying this is Australia's problem. It's these people are transiting through their country on the way to Australia. They have so there are already a swag of dangerous sort of nuances and so forth with the issue, and then this over the top, I think, does represent a real threat to cooperation.
We also know a little bit more about the Abbott government's successes and failures in the area of boats policy, thanks to Senate estimates yesterday.
Yeah, and I think it just once again underscores the problem of having this military command structure, Operation Sovereign Borders, where it is the blurring of the lines between the military and the government and its political messages is highly problematic, and it was demonstrated yesterday where, in the Parliament in question time, both Tony Abbott and Minister Morrison refused to say whether the boat buyback policy had been implemented, insisting that it was still very much part of the sweep of measures that they're using that is stopping the boats, and yet under questioning in Senate estimates, Angus Campbell revealed that, well, the Indonesians don't like this policy and we're not actually doing it. He wouldn't be forthcoming on the question of whether there have been turnbacks or other aspects of policy, and that remains unclear.
So buybacks isn't working. Turnbacks, as far as we know, the towbacks of boats hasn't occurred, and yet the critical end of the equation number is working in the government's favour because there's fewer boats coming. Yeah,
but then you have this debate about when did they start to be stopped, and even I think in finance, one of the finance department officials confirmed that the numbers began to come down dramatically under just before the election as the PNG solution, so-called, kicked in, and whether you say comparing 2 months, the last 2 months with the first 2 months of this, as the government does, and says it's almost 80% reduction, or you say, well, the big reduction occurred after the PNG solution, and if you compare the couple of weeks before the election with the last couple of weeks, there's not much difference. And the problem Angus Campbell has is that having so ruthlessly played politics with this issue in opposition, Minister Morrison is still trying to say that, well, we're the ones who are stopping the boats with our policies, the other mob were hopeless, they weren't serious, and yet the other mob did implement policies which basically were derived from the John Howard approach of deterrent, but were constantly undermined by the then opposition.
Michael, it's a fight that'll go on all the way to the next election. Of course, the badge of being the government that stopped the boats is one this government will dearly want, of course.
Absolutely.
Michael Gordon, as always, very grateful for you coming in and speaking with us.
Thanks, Tim.